Hi everyone, my name is Nicholas Mendez of GDG Port of Spain, and it's with pleasure that I welcome you to DevFest Caribbean 2021. Now, DevFest Caribbean is an event that's done in collaboration with the Google developer groups of the Caribbean. And what we're doing right now, over the first few days leading up to the event, is our special DevFest week track, made just for you. So let's get into what we are doing, what we'll be looking at today. First off, we have something that's called, we like to call the Spotlight Interview. So the Spotlight Interview is just an initiative whereby we make space to hear stories from individuals doing really interesting things in the wider digital and tech hemisphere. So we have Khadija Rahman, who does graphic design, and she has a really interesting story about her business and what she is doing. Then, followed by that, we have Anil Ramnanan, who is a longtime speaker in these DevFest events, and he's a learning management systems administrator at the University of West Indies Open Campus. And he'll be speaking about automating with infrastructure as code. And finally, to end things off for the first day, we have Fazia Mohammed from TT Lab, who's a data scientist, and she'll be speaking on the application of UVA and machine learning techniques in the agricultural sector. Well, without further ado, let's get into the sessions. Hi, everyone. So for this Spotlight interview today, I'm happy to have Miss Khadija Rahman joining me. Tej, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good, doing good. How are you going?
I'm doing great, thank you. So why don't we start with just giving a bit of an introduction about yourself. What would you describe your work as? What do you do?
Well, I'm a graphic designer, and I have my bachelor's degree in graphic design. I graduated from Custard cum laude, and I currently also have my own business where I do design and printing. And I also, before that, I worked in an advertising agency as well. So I have about 6 years experience in the field.
Awesome, awesome. So then what you would say that a little bit of industry experience that you got really helped you to be able to go on your own?
Definitely. So I was lucky enough that when I was in my final year of doing my bachelor's, I got a job in an advertising agency. So I was really immersed into the agency life and the work life at a good age, I would say. Where I used to work was very diverse. So it's where I also learned and picked up my printing skills. It taught me a lot to do with client relations as well, which is a huge help. So for me personally, it was a huge stepping stone to be able to now open and have my own business fully functioning and running. So yeah.
Yeah, I definitely see that. So when I look at your IG and whatnot, I can see that there's that acumen for marketing. You have all of these packages and you're able to fit it to tailor it to your customer needs. So can you talk a bit about that, about your process and how do you work with your customers and make sure their satisfaction?
Yeah, well, one of the first things I do, and I do it for every single client, and it doesn't matter what their budget is or what type of job. The first thing I do is that I want to find out about my clients, because even though so using the example of like a food business, so you would have what people call the standard way to market a food business, but every single person has their own personal touch, they have their own style. So one of the things I like to do is get to know my clients first, because at the end of the day, it's their business, and you want it to appeal to them as well. So I would find out, what kind of aesthetic they like, what kind of colors they like. And then I try to work with their budget as best as possible, because I market towards mainly small local businesses, because I'm a small local business as well. So I try to help other people in that segment. And in terms of getting that information about them, what their style is, and then I find out what they want their company to go, right? How they want their company to go in the future. Like, what are their goals? What kind of audience or clients or customers they try to market? I really For me personally, I believe in having strong communication with my clients and customers. There are some people who would just take the information and they would do what they have to do and then they would send it. But I like to keep open and clear communication with them, because for me, customer satisfaction is a huge, huge thing for me, because I wouldn't want bad service. So I try not to do that to my customers and clients. So I work with them step by step. If they have changes, we work with it together. You know, sometimes I even call them or will have them on the phone while I'm doing changes, you know, to make sure at the end of the day, they're happy and I'm happy.
That's so excellent. So that's great. So you really customize. So what I'm getting here, that you do a certain level of strategy and branding with your customers. And that's something that I think not a lot of people know about. It's probably undervalued. Not a lot of people is probably on their mind. So I'm wondering, are you in a place where you have to kind of educate them a little bit on this extra value you're bringing?
Yes, oftentimes it happens, especially for people who are really starting their business from scratch. So that's something I also do. I try to explain to them the importance of branding, the importance of marketing and advertising, because a lot of people actually don't know the value that it has. You know, they just think, okay, they just want to get a logo for their business. But you know, your logo is your first brand identity. It what represents your company the minute somebody sees it, you know. So I try to explain to them so that they understand, you know, that it's an investment. You know, I don't want just people to think, okay, they're just pushing money into advertising or they're pushing money into design. I want them to realize and understand that's an investment that's going to benefit them in the long run.
That's great. So you kind of, I'm hearing that you kind of do a sort of consultation with your clients. I'm wondering, is that something you offer like a service, or you give them like a first free consultation? How do you approach?
Well, in terms of a consultation, because most of my clients, I work with them so well, it's like a free service in a way when they choose me as their designer, because I take it doesn't matter if they're small clients or big clients or corporate clients, I maintain the same quality throughout. So, you know, even if they just give me, okay, for an example, they say they want to get a poster done, I wouldn't just go up and do a poster. I will, for every single job, I talk with my clients and I get a good understanding of what it is they want. And then I proceed to design. So in terms of service for me, in terms of consultation, I guess in a way it's a free service when you choose me as a designer. Now, if I'm doing consultation for a company, as in they hire me as a consultant, that would be a different scenario altogether.
Cool. So now I want to talk about, how do you reach your clients? So, you know, you are into marketing, so obviously you would have to market your business yourself. What platforms do you use?
Well, I use Instagram and Facebook, but I also get a lot of clients through word of mouth, which is something, and referrals, which is something I'm incredibly grateful for, that a lot of my clients actually talk about me. You know, when people ask them, oh, where did you get your logo done, or your flyer, or even printing, because I do t-shirts and call cards and all of those things as well. So a lot of my clients come from referrals and word of mouth, which I think personally is one of the best marketing tools, because you know you're getting personal reviews out there, and that's how you're getting work. I also get a lot of work through my Facebook and my Instagram as well. So that for me are my main marketing tools. So Facebook, Instagram, and then referrals.
Great. And I think happy customers, I agree with that as well, are the best kind of recommendations for your business, you know, with amount and that. And it's testament to the level of satisfaction that you provide to your customers. So I'm really grateful for that. So I'm thinking, so you mentioned that you were working in industry for a while. So what made you decide to make the jump? And how do you, can you give us a picture of how did that line up with the pandemic, or the onset of the pandemic?
Well, for me, ever since I was younger, I always liked the idea of working for myself. And I always wanted to have my own business. So that's always been a goal of mine. So eventually I knew I wanted to gain the experience, because I stayed in that job literally from my last year bachelor's up until this year when I made the jump to leave. And I still have a good relationship with them. So for me, it during COVID time, it came a lot sooner than I intended. Because in my head, I was planning maybe 3 years along the line. But I think COVID, and I could probably speak for a couple of other people too. COVID kind of gave us, in a way, a push to make certain decisions in our lives, and this was one of it for me. So I just came to the realization one day that because I had my business even though I was working at the agency, and I started to realize, I was kind of getting a little bit more work, and I just sat down one day and I was like, you know what? I think I can do this. It was like an internal dialogue that I had with myself. I mean, there were lots of risks, given that when I did leave, the country was now kind of opening back up. So it was in my head, and I had a lot of anxiety, I was like, what if I leave and then, the work slows down or things like that. But for me, it was like a leap of faith. And it's one that I don't regret at all because, sometimes we have to do certain things and life has a way of figuring itself out. And this was one of it for me because I could say, through the grace of God, I'm succeeding.
Excellent. And I think that's one of the main things in entrepreneurship, having that bravery to handle the risk. It's everything. Risk is everything. So I want to talk a bit about how you've expanded your product offerings. So I know you said global design, but I remember I passed by just a full disclosure. I'm friends with her brother, Inzamam, so I would go online with Inzamam every now and again, and I saw you had all of these hardware. Actually, look, it's in the background there. I think that's the button maker. Yes, or your sticker. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, my equipment. Well, so this behind me is actually the heat press. So I use this to do mainly t-shirts. And behind me, I have an Epson printer. So it's an inkjet. So that's the main equipment I have. I also, to the side, I also have a plotter machine. So for me, one thing I realized where I was working before, I developed a passion for printing as well. Because, and I was lucky that way because there are a lot of designers that, and a lot of agencies, they don't get to see the finished product or participate in that process. And it's a process I found a deep love and appreciation for. So I would say I have an equal amount of passion for design as well as the printing process. So this is just some of the equipment that I use because I offer various services for printing, call cards, besides the t-shirts and flyers and posters and all of that. Yeah.
That's great. So I think you are positioned in a really nice place where you have this total vertical integration of everything. You can see the product end to end from design to the final product. So I'm just curious, how do you handle things like distribution when you have a really large order? How you getting that around? How you handle things like logistics?
Well, for me, and I would admit this, I have a slight problem in terms of setting proper deadlines. But in the sense of I like to take on too much. But when it comes to large orders, I'm lucky and fortunate enough that I have a team, aka my family. So one time I had almost was it about 500 t-shirts I had to do within the span of 3 days, and I was lucky enough that I had them all hands on deck. So I would press and they would fold and one would package and things like that. But for me, one of the things that I need to do and I try my best to do is to really set proper deadlines for myself and set proper deadlines for the clients as well, because you don't want to promise them something and then it comes down to the time and you're still rushing or you have to push back the time and all of that. So when I have big orders to do, I give myself enough time and I sit down and once they're good with the design, then I take on the printing process and then I package, and then if they need delivery or if they will meet me to pick up and things like that. So I have a step-by-step process on how I handle those things because it helps to keep everything in order and it helps to prevent mistakes from happening as well.
Oh, great. So you have a setup where they would come and pick up the order by you?
Yes. So I usually work with, I have the option that they can do a deposit or they can pay in cash. Because where I live, I use Price Plaza as a pickup location, a free pickup location. So they have the option to do that. Or they could choose delivery either with CC Post or they could choose delivery with me. It's their choice. So they have many options in terms of collecting their order.
Awesome. So you actually have a setup where you deliver via TC Post. Can you speak a bit about that?
Well, with TC Post, it's very simple. You just have to go and just get the envelopes. You pay $30 for the envelopes, and you just package. It's a big envelope, so you package either if it's posters or T-shirts into the envelope. You write their address and you just drop it into TC Post, and then you just include it into their fee because TC Post is a standard $30 delivery. So it's actually a very interesting, a very easy and fast process with TC Post, and they usually deliver twice a week. So I'm able to at least let them know as well when they might expect the package.
Oh, that is really interesting to know. That's good to hear that our postal service is reliable. And
Yes.
okay. So I have another question here that speaks more about the content. So what kind of content you would put on your social media platforms in your, advertising and marketing of your business?
Well, for my content, I would say it's kind of diverse. Originally my Instagram started off with just really as an online portfolio because I'm currently developing my own website, but it's not live as yet. So I used my Instagram really as an online portfolio. In terms of when I was getting work, I would send that link for other people to see my work. So I could really say only recently I started to push more packages and more deals and my prices and things like that. So my content is really past work that I would have done for clients because that's one thing I realized, especially with our local market, they want to see samples of your work. So it's very easy for me to just be like, you could go on Instagram and I will send them my username and stuff like that. I also do, one of my passions is nature photography. It's one thing that brings me a lot of joy and brings me happiness. It's a hobby of mine. So I also showcase that on my Instagram feed. And then I also offer packages and stuff like that. And I also just do little stories in terms of the printing and all of that. So people can see, one thing I've learned in terms of marketing, especially with social media, is people like to see that humanistic element. They like to see people actually doing the work because it's something that they can relate to. Yes, they might know what I look like, but they like to see me actually doing the work. It's more interesting to them. So I push a lot on my stories as well with me actually doing the work, doing design, printing, even down to sometimes my packaging process. I will show something like that because all of that is aesthetics for people as well. So that's the main kind of content I push on my Instagram. So it's really my portfolio is the main thing that I have my Instagram for. And so far it's been working for me.
That's excellent. I agree. I think that human element being put in something for the customers to be able to relate to, I think that could really work in your favor. So let's see, just looking at, I think that is about it for questions. So I think that will conclude more or less the spotlight interview. Thanks again for agreeing to be part of the DevFest, Tish.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it so much.
And is there any closing thoughts you'd like to share with the audience? Where can they find you? What things you have coming up next?
Well, you could find me on Instagram at TEEJ_R. I have some Christmas packages that I would be releasing in terms of printing. I also am launching a Christmas t-shirt line, which is my original designs that you can get as well. And in terms of I would like to offer some advice for people who would like to get into the field of graphic design. It's one thing I want to, let people know that it's a field that I would say you have to have a passion for. a lot of people think that graphic design is kind of an easy field because, anybody could do marketing, as they used to say. But I would like people to also know not to get discouraged. Don't compare yourself to any other designer or artist out there, because for me, when I was learning, I would have been like 17 years old now starting graphic design, and I'm comparing myself to people who are working like in McCann, and that's something we have to stop doing because everybody has their own unique style, and you have to give yourself time to learn, give yourself time to practice, and trust me, you will get better. So don't compare your design style to somebody else's or your work quality to somebody else's. Once you believe in yourself and you work hard, trust me, you'll be able to achieve a good career in graphic design.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, was your experience in industry what led you to understand the market out there in terms of how you expanded to the different products?
Yes, definitely. So something I've realized is that people want to be able to do everything in one place. They want to be able to create their logo and get all their printed material. And one of the things I offer is a minimum quantity of literally one. You can order one t-shirt, you can get one sticker, one label. I even do sample prints as well. And it's a huge market out there, because a lot of other printing companies as well, they don't have that kind of minimum quantity. So most of my customers, I would literally take them from the design of their logo all the way to the t-shirts that they now currently wear. So it's a very strong market out there, and I'm really glad that I was able to tap into that and expand my business.
That's so awesome. I like that story of being able to help a business grow and you actually grow with them. That is so interesting that you're really focused on small businesses, people now starting off, because I could kind of relate to that issue too. Of you go and design your logo one place, you get your quote there, then you have to run to bring it. And sometimes the people who are doing the printing might source the t-shirts, they get the t-shirts somewhere else and then bring it to something else to actually do it. But you do it all in one place. Yeah,
even down to the sourcing of the t-shirts, I do it as well. I have arrangements even, because sometimes, different suppliers have different fits. So if they want to meet me and see the t-shirt, feel the material, all of that, I would do all of that for my clients.
Yes, awesome. That is awesome advice. Thank you so much for that, Teach. So that brings us more or less to the end, and we'll see you all in the next session. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Hi, good day, everyone. I'm Nicholas Mendez, and joined with me right here is Anil Ramdanan, and he's a learning management systems administrator in the University of the West Indies Open Campus. So welcome, Anil.
Hi, thank you.
And I should also say he's a longtime speaker at these DevFest events, so really happy to have his contribution again. His talk today is on infrastructure as code. So it's really interesting that you had this talk, Anil, because just yesterday I had a lecture on DevOps. So you can give us some of the motivation behind your talk today?
Yeah, well, for us, like at the University of the West Indies Open Campus, we had a project going on to basically look at how we're going to handle, future-proofing our infrastructure. And our choices were, to go to the same route we had, like the hosted route or cloud hosting. And when we made the decision for cloud hosting, it opened up a lot of possibilities for us in terms of management of the infrastructure and that type of thing. And infrastructure as code, being able to script out and manage your infrastructure. As if you imagine an application was one of the things that really made it easy for us to kind of get into, because I, as a developer and systems administrator, I wasn't an infrastructure person, but it allowed me to get into, being able to manage infrastructure because it gave me a framework I could understand and work with.
All right, sounds good. So without further ado, the floor is yours, and I'll just take it away.
All right. Well, my talk today is on infrastructure as code. So first, a little bit about me. I'm the Learning Management Systems Administrator at the University of the West Indies Open Campus. And the Open Campus is one of the campuses of the University of the West Indies that is dedicated to online learning. And my job is to manage the infrastructure and the application that we use to deliver courses online. And that is based on Moodle, which is an open source learning management system. So I work with multiple cloud services on multiple platforms, because what we do is we use multiple platforms. Primarily now our applications infrastructure run on Amazon Web Services, but we also use Google Apps for education, for things like email and certain collaborative things. So what is infrastructure as code? So you would hear infrastructure as code, especially when you start to learn about things like DevOps and that type of thing. And basically what is being able to use code and tools to do things like provision, manage, and deploy things like infrastructure like servers, storage, database, network components, etc. And it allows you to do things like monitor these components, manage them, and repair them programmatically, like using code. So a little bit of background, as I had said before, at UE Open Campus, in early 2020, we had a project where we had to make a decision between, refreshing our hardware and remaining with a hosted system or migrating to cloud services. And at that time, we were, into the process, but then the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and especially for us, which as a online learning service, we had a lot more to do in a very short time. So it accelerated our need to move. So we did an evaluation, and the campus, decided we will move to Amazon Web Services. And over that time, we migrated over 70 virtual machines, 10 applications, 5 networks, over 6 terabytes of data initially. And with, as we get more requirements, we're able to spin up more resources as requirements hit us going forward. So in that context, when we moved to cloud services, being able to manage all this infrastructure was something that we had to look and find a way to do it in a efficient manner. We were a small team. For the learning management system, team is really 2 people. The rest of the teams were just as small. So what you found was that we really need to find a way to kind of squeeze the most out of what little resources we had. So we did things like re-platform the learning management system to take advantage of the cloud infrastructure, and working with the cloud, that kind of opened up new ways of building and managing infrastructure. It allows us to look at infrastructure in a different way. And because of the nature of the cloud services, the API-driven nature of it, we could interact with the infrastructure the same way we interacted with code, with applications. So how does that work? Well, similar to the process of, building and deploying an application, you have some very basic processes you go through. You write the code, You have a version control system, to manage your code. You have a review system to make sure your code is a certain quality and tested and that type of thing. And then you have a deployment system to allow you to deploy the code. And infrastructure code is basically the same process, but instead of just the application, we could deploy the infrastructure all the way up to the application as well, along with the infrastructure. So you basically have three different components in deployment. So the first is the resource provisioning. So resource provisioning is like provisioning the basic resources that you would need, like a virtual private cloud network. Then you would need, compute resources. So we use like Amazon EC2 servers, instances to provide the compute. Then you have things like database resources. So we use like Amazon RDS for database services. And then we use things like Amazon EFS and S3 for storage. So first you have to kind of figure out what resources you want to use. And you basically have to provision those resources. Now that you have those resources, you have to configure them. And so you have the OS and the host configuration. So we use Linux for learning management system. We were on CentOS, and now we use Amazon Linux too. And you have to configure things like OpenSSH and Apache and Nginx and PHP and Python and all the libraries and dependencies that come with them. And then once you've done that, you have the application configuration. So once you've deployed the application, you have to do things like configure the application, make sure that any dependencies and libraries you need for the application are there. You need to make sure that the application has proper credentials. If you're using something like the RDS service, you make sure you have the username and key and password and stuff like that to be able for the application be able to access the services, any API keys, certificates, that type of thing. So across the deployment, those are the three basic things that you would be doing. So in order to do that, you have a number of tools. Because we're on AWS, you have AWS CloudFormation, which is proprietary and specific infrastructure as code tool for AWS infrastructure, because it has very deep integration with the AWS services. If you're using Azure, Azure has a comparative tool. Google has a comparative tool. Most other cloud services that provide these services, they have comparative tools. Another thing we use is Ansible. So Ansible is like an open source configuration management tool that has some infrastructure as code features. It is probably not as full featured as like a proper infrastructure code tool, but it provides us with enough that we're able to do what we need to do. It also has like a kind of middle of the road thing where it gives you the ability to do things like multi-platform, multi-cloud deployments. So it's not really tied to a particular cloud service. It's agentless, so you don't have to install any agents on your infrastructure. It acts through SSH, and it does mainly configuration management and infrastructure provisioning, not so much deep into the infrastructure management, but we use a lot of the AWS tools for that. There are also things like Chef and Puppet, which we are looking at. These are configuration management tools, and they have like automation capabilities and some infrastructure management capabilities. So something like Chef is designed for integration into DevOps practices. So you'll find like a lot of people who into DevOps use that. Puppet is like pure configuration management. So if you want to do things like, automate configuration quickly across multiple instances of infrastructure, Puppet is good for that. And there are many, many more tools available. So, you have to basically take a look out there and see which tools fit your specific needs and, make that decision. So we use Ansible because it was, the easiest one to get into, and it provided us with what we needed in order to get up and running. So what Ansible does is it uses these things called playbooks to describe automation jobs. So you basically have a playbook, and the playbook uses YAML to specify the resources in a human readable format. So, writing the YAML makes it easier to kind of specify what it is you need to be done, what it is needs to be done. It's open source and cross-platform. You can do multi-tier deployments with it. So an example of Ansible is this. So before we were talking about the 3 levels of provisioning. So the first is resource provisioning. So here is where you could specify in YAML, you want to provision a EC2 instance, which is a compute instance. So you're basically setting up a server. And basically you specify, things like the subnet, there's the region you want. If you're using an image, a pre-built image, you can specify that. All these in brackets here are variables, environment variables that you could define so that when you run it, it basically fills those in for you. So you could basically create a playbook that says, I want to create X number of EC2 instances for a particular project in a particular region, using a particular security group for a particular project, that type of thing, and then be able to run those. And the nice thing about Ansible is that, it's immutable in that every time, once you specify what it's supposed to do, every time it runs, it does the same thing. It creates the same type of resources every time. So once you have it down, all you really need is this one playbook, or this playbook that does the one thing that you want it to do. So another example is once you have the resource, like the compute or the storage resource set up, you want to configure it to be able to do things like, for example, you want to set up a web server, and Ansible helps with that as well. So here's where you specify a playbook to install something like Apache. So you could install the Apache package. So this playbook basically installs the package, copies a dummy web page to the package, sets the permissions of the web page. So you could basically set up any of the applications that you would need. So if you're using Apache, you could install Apache. If you're using things like Redis, or using something like Python, or any other tool that you need to configure on the server, you could specify it here and it will install it. And the last one is the application itself. So you could actually define the application installation. Now, this is the complete this playbook for WordPress, but it is part of it. And basically, it gives you an idea of being able to define, like, if I want to deploy a WordPress application, it will do things like download and extract it into a particular destination, update the Apache site, change any configurations that you need to change, and basically script that entire thing so that once you run the playbook, every time you run the playbook, it will do the exact same thing. So you could put all of these together to be able to, say, deploy a WordPress server. So you can deploy everything from the compute and database instances or any infrastructure you need, configure the host, install Apache, PHP, MySQL, whatever else you need, install WordPress, and any other plugins, for example, that you may need. And throughout that entire process, now you have a bunch of playbooks that you could use to be able to deploy this particular application from infrastructure up. And you could scale that out as much as you want. So why use infrastructure as code? So by being able to do this, I mean, it cuts down deployment time and cost, obviously. So being able to do something like this means that I don't have to, sit down and manually configure a server anymore, manually install software anymore. There's a playbook or a process that I have to go through. Things that would have taken hours or days sometimes takes minutes now. And time is money. So, cost comes down when you're able to do those things in a more reasonable time frame. Also, deployments are standardized and repeatable, which means every time you run those playbooks, like I said, it does the same thing. So you can count on when you run a playbook, these things will happen, and you can repeat that over and over. Also, deployments of version control, much like your software much like your code in your application, you can have version control for your playbooks. So, you have a single source of truth for how you build in your infrastructure. And then you have like audit logs and that type of thing available so that this is exactly what was done and this is exactly what happened when you try to do it. It also cuts down on ghost IT because the process of putting in something like infrastructure as code helps a lot because you don't have people, going off and doing their own thing, going off and setting up their own, server, installing their own versions of software that not authorized, that type of thing. You don't know where to get it, that type of thing. So, it cuts down on that type of activity because everybody has to go through the same process. Everybody has to use the same playbooks, and those playbooks are, verified and standardized and go through a process of testing and retesting to make sure that they work. You can also do scalable deployments. So very large deployments can be done in a very reliable way. I mean, you can sit down and take your time and configure one web server, but what happens when you have to configure 10 or 100? Like we said before, when we did our migration was over 70 virtual machines that had to be moved. And, being able to deploy things at scale becomes important, and it becomes untenable for somebody to do that by hand. So you have to have some way of managing that, and infrastructure as code is a good way of doing that. You also have the ability for teams to deploy their own environments. So you could set up, a system where developers could, create their own sandbox for development. Quality assurance can develop their own sandbox for testing. Security people can set up their own type of sandbox for security testing. And then you have deployment, the production, and you can set up, a process for that. And these individual processes, that means you give the developers the tools to be able to, say, spin up some infrastructure for them to do development without having to worry about, them having to contact somebody from the infrastructure team or something like that to be able to fulfill that request for them. They have the ability to do that because they can run these playbooks, and those playbooks have been, went through a assurance process where they've been verified that they were able to do what you need them to do. So developer would spin up a sandbox, you know that the sandbox that is being spun up provides the developer with the environment they need and nothing else, no security issues, that type of thing. You can also do things like multi-cloud and hybrid cloud deployments easily. So being able to scale things means that, not only can I build something for Amazon EC2, but if I want to be able to deploy on, Google infrastructure, I could do that as well. I just need to write the right playbook for that. You could also do hybrid cloud. So if you want to deploy on premises as well as on cloud, you can do playbooks for that as well. So here are some of the things to look out for. Some of these things can have a steep learning curve. As a developer, it's easier to get into because you are accustomed to a certain type of process, and infrastructure as code follows that, development process. But if you're not, then, the learning curve could be steep, especially when it comes to things like tools are being used. A lot of the tools, you need to take your time and be able to understand what the tools do and, how they do it, because, there's a lot of areas there where misconfigurations can cause problems. So, there's a learning curve for some people where, you kind of have to be able to take the time to understand what's happening and how to do it. Also, you could experience configuration drift, because especially in areas where you have people who make manual changes but don't capture it in the infrastructure as code process. So for example, somebody would install a library on a server but not include it into the infrastructure as code process. So every time you deploy something new and it doesn't have that library and the application breaks, you have an issue. So, you have to keep a tight rein on the process, make sure things like these manual changes are, heavily discouraged and not done, so that everything is built into the infrastructure as code process. Management of things like your API keys, passwords, certificates, that type of thing is very important. Especially when it comes to being able to use things like repositories and that type of thing. You don't want people, posting their API keys or their passwords or stuff like that in repositories, much less public repositories. You don't want them, committing to GitHub the password for your server. So yeah, you have to have a way of managing the secrets, and you can use a secret storage system or vault system. A lot of the tools like Ansible has Ansible Vault, which allows you to create a space where you can manage these types of resources, your API keys and that type of thing, in a secure way, so that you don't have to worry about things like being able, committing them to GitHub accidentally and that type of thing. Improper configurations can cause things like ghost resources. So if you do a misconfiguration and it spins up like a compute instance and that type of thing, if you don't have proper audit trails or proper processes in place to verify the playbooks that you create, and you could spin up resources that are there in the background, taking up, time, money, because you have to pay for that. And it may be hard to find those resources, especially when you're doing things at scale. I mean, it's easy if all you're doing is spinning up, one or two servers. But when you get into the dozens or the hundreds, it's also easy to miss something when it's misconfigured. So, I mean, it has its challenges when you try to get into it, but all in all, I mean, for us, the infrastructure as code methodology, or being able to do things like create these playbooks to automate a lot of the things that we used to do manually, is one of the really good things about the move to the cloud, because before we had to do a lot of manual work, and now that work, once it's put into a proper process, you no longer have to worry about, certain types of configurations or that type of thing. You don't have to worry about the time it takes. You can do things, very quickly. We able to spin up resources in minutes now instead of hours. And, it saves a lot, but it is also a process that you really need to pay close attention to. And yeah, so that is infrastructure as code for me. So thank you for the opportunity, and I hope everyone finds some value out of the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Anil.
Into place in order to address some of those things. But I mean, a lot of these services that they provide easy to implement, and you can't beat the cost. I mean, at the end of the day, at least for me, speaking for me, I mean, when I look at the cost savings that we had, like over 50% reduction in cost, it's hard to justify the other arguments. It's difficult, especially when you don't have a showstopper argument. It's more preference at this point.
Yes, great. And I like that you mentioned that that fallback of on-prem, because I was just curious, do you have to move to the cloud if you want to adopt infrastructure as code, or can you actually use it on some level for on-prem?
Yeah, you could definitely do it for on-prem. Something like Ansible, all the other tools, they will work for on-premises. It works a little differently, but for like the things we do, like provisioning the server, installing Apache, installing WordPress, something like that. There's no difference between doing that on the cloud or doing it on premises. It's just the configuration of the server part. I mean, I use Ansible to do all kinds of things, like deploy a web server to a Raspberry Pi quickly, so I don't have to sit down there and keep doing that configuration over and over. Just run the playbook and it installs whatever it installs and does what it had to do. And you could do stuff like that. I mean, it is very flexible. On premises is not a problem. And it is more about the process than it is about the actual infrastructure itself. You could find, processes for different modes of infrastructure, whether it be on premises, cloud, hybrid cloud. You can do both if you want, that type of thing.
Okay, cool. So I remember you mentioned your talk, your on-prem setup was around 70 VMs.
Yeah.
70, right?
70. So that's the entire application base. There's not just a learning management system, but that's across the board.
Wow. So can you just give me an idea, how does that look in the cloud? Do you just map it directly to VMs in the cloud, or you do other kind of compute resources?
So, it depends on the application. Like some applications, basically we have two stages. The first stage is what we call a lift and shift, which is basically you take your VM from your on-premises and you put your VM on to the cloud. So that was the first phase of it. But that it works. So you move everything to the cloud, but also you don't really take advantage of all of the cloud services. So the next phase is replatforming. So that in that phase, for example, we replatform the learning management system to take advantage of cloud services like Amazon RDS and the EFS and S3 storage and stuff like that. So you could take a application once you have a VM, and they actually provide tools where they provided a tool for us that we are able to just set it up, and it just copied all the VMs across to the cloud and then spun them up there. So we just shut them down on premises, spun them up in the cloud, and they started working from there. But then the second stage is working on the efficiency, trying to get the cost down, by replatforming and making it more efficient to use the services that we have.
So awesome. So then I was thinking, y'all had that strategy of putting it directly first and then replatforming. What do you think is the advantage of that as opposed to going straight to your new fancy cloud architecture?
Well, first of all, a lot of the applications simply don't fit into the cloud paradigm. So they weren't designed to run in the cloud. So, your only option was to take some of these applications and move them to a one-to-one move. The other one was in terms of time, because of the situation we were in. Remember, this was early 2020, pandemic hit in March. Not only did we have to move, but we had to move because we needed more resources, because you had to bring up more campuses. We had to bring up the continuing professional education. That was about 5,000 students. We had another campus that had to come up. They were developing like the Five Islands campus and that type of thing. So, time was something we didn't really have. So you didn't have time to replatform before we moved. We had to move and then replatform after. So it was the situation we were in. If you have the time, you could replatform, but remember that that involves a lot of time. It may involve downtime. It may involve issues with being able to transition from your on-premises to your new thing. You have to do a lot of testing and stuff like that. It depends on your situation. For us, time-wise, and in terms of the constraints of some of the applications, that was pretty much the best move for us.
Awesome. So again, thanks again for being part of the DevFest. So it's great to get you talks. It's really technical and in-depth. And I think that will be it for this one, and I will see you all in the next one.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Thanks. Hi, good day, everyone. And for this, I'm Nicholas. And for this session, join with me here is Fazia Mohammed, who's going to deliver a talk on the application of UVA and machine learning techniques in the agricultural sector. So Fazia, welcome to the DevFest. How are you?
I'm fine.
Awesome. So it says your company is TT Lab. You're a data scientist there. Can you tell us a bit about what TT Lab is about?
Well, TT Lab is a research company that, we do novel research into different aspects of machine learning and where it is applicable. For me in particular, I do agricultural application in the agricultural sector. And there are other sectors people are in.
Awesome. Just to share with the audience, I have been following TT Lab for some time, and they've been doing so much amazing things and applying techniques in data science and machine learning to problems right here in the Caribbean region. I think they're really leading the way in terms of innovation. And you could catch TT Lab at their website, lab.tt, and they typically have very often these talks and presentations, much like the one you're going to see now. So without further ado, Fazia, I'll let you take it away.
Okay. Hi, good day, everyone. Today I'll be presenting a research paper on the ongoing FAIR project in Trinidad and Tobago. My name is Fazia Mohammed, and I'm attached to the FAIR project. The FAIR project stands for Farming Adaptation, Artificial Intelligence for Resilience, and the research paper was presented at the UEFSD 100-year anniversary. The research project was done to help farmers affected by climate change and in an effort to create more sustainable agricultural practices. The team consists of Professor Patrick Hussein, who is the director of TT Labs, the CEO of the Cropper Foundation, Omar Mohammed, the amazing technical team, and myself. The project is funded by National Geographic and ASIA, and some equipment was provided by NDVIA. It is led by the collaborative team. What we intend to do. We intend on creating a data set that would be applicable to the region based on small tropical island vegetation found in the Caribbean. We intend on creating machine learning models based on that labeled data set and creating an application for farmers and technical officers to use. It has the potential to impact the industry significantly through intelligent spraying, predictive insights, disease diagnosis, crop yield improvement, and crop soil monitoring. And how are we going about this? Well, we intend to implement 3 models. We intend to implement models that characterize plant health, water stress, and object detection. Right now, we're in the process of collecting our data. And when we've collected all our data and labeled it, we intend on creating an initial set of models. After creating those initial sets of models, we will be doing some seminars to educate farmers about how AI and machine learning can be applied to them, especially considering we're a small island developing state. And then at about April 2022, we intend on being completed with the project. We're doing this through the collection of UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle data, in the form of RGB images, as we can see here, and NDVI images that we can see here. NDVI stands for Normalized Difference Vegetative Index. While chlorophyll absorbs all forms of light, chlorophyll does not absorb all forms of light. In fact, it reflects a lot of infrared and green light. And the NDVI image allows us to take up an image that depicts this reflective index. Here we have a model that we trained based on images that we took up in the Caribbean on pepper plants, the same field here. And we have a predictive random forest model that we applied to external data. Using this data, we built some models, and we have a comparative index called the Jacquard index that we are using. We did these models based on open source data that was found online. And we have this comparative look at these models where the Jacquard index really measures the similarity and diversity of the sample. And we have the UNET model performing the best thus far. However, this is subject to change because we are also implementing different computer vision techniques to make our models more robust. We have to be very thorough in what we're doing. So we have more models that we intend on implementing on the label data that we've collected, such as naive bayes and K-nearest neighbors. And lastly, we will determine the most effective and the most robust models and implement them in our final application for the farmers to use. And that's it for my talk. Thank you for listening.
So thank you so much for that presentation, short and sweet. So you mentioned that you're going to use different models, but maybe you could break it down for our audience and help us try to understand what do you mean by a model and how is it relevant to the stuff you do?
Well, a model is a way for us to predict and classify. So when it comes to images, you have the ground truth, which is a labeled image that is how we perceive or how we see and interpret our surroundings, right? But a computer doesn't have the advantage of, being able to look at an image and be like, okay, this is a leaf, unless we train it to do so and we label the images to do so. So that's what, when I say model, I mean, it is, there are different types of models. We have naive bayes, which is one that I'm implementing along with MobileNet. These are things that are able to predict the differences and distinguish based on things that I can't even see with my own eyes. So, yeah.
Interesting. So can you also say like the models are established techniques in which allows the computers to solve these problems.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. And these models typically would require a certain amount of data. So I believe that's what the drone is for.
Yeah, data collection is a bit tedious, and with the changing in seasons in Trinidad, you have a lot of cloud cover, and we have a DJI Phantom 4 Pro, and it needs a significant amount of GPS signal, so data collection is slow, and data labeling is even slower.
Awesome. Well, I guess the good thing in this project is you'll have full control over the data set. You don't have to depend on someone else and probably they're handling their quality of data.
Yeah. Also, because we're in the tropical region, a lot of data sets that you'd find online is not applicable to us. So it is, a real niche project when it comes to, tropical environments, the Caribbean, and, regional application in general.
Yes, I think that's like an underlying theme in the projects I've typically seen from TT Lab is that, yes, there are things established out there, but we always have to bring it into our own Caribbean context. And you're really faced with that interesting constraint where data may not be available. And it's so interesting to see how you all get around that. So I have another question as it relates. Early on, I saw this as a collaboration between National Geographic, Azure, NVIDIA, the the Copper Foundation. So I was just interested in how were you able to get all of these players together for this project? Can you give us that story?
So we did a proposal to the Azure and National Geographic Earth for AI research grant. And after that, we started up work and we needed some extra materials like processing power, and we also wanted a Jetson Nano to do to run our models in the field because we didn't think a phone would be suffice. And we got some extra stuff from NVIDIA, and it just keeps growing as it goes on. So it's been pretty great in that sense.
That's excellent. So congratulations on your team for securing that grant. I mean, this is an international grant, so you would have to be competing with the world.
Yeah.
That's really impressive that you're able to land that. And it's so cool. So you all have a kind of sort of budding relationship with NVIDIA as well, because they're providing some support.
Yes, they're providing all of the support through the Jetson Nano, and I do believe we got some processors also.
Oh, that's so interesting. I wonder if you can talk about how that collaboration began.
Well, there's a person attached to a team called Jade, and Jade did an application for NVIDIA to fund some of the Jetson Nanos, and when we asked for the Jetson Nanos, they ended up giving us a lot more than just that. Yeah. Through TT Lab also. Yeah.
Okay, that is so interesting. So we're seeing how all the previous work you'll do is forming like a sort of like a snowball, because it is helping you all secure bigger and better opportunities. I really enjoy your talk this year. Thanks for coming out. I just want to probably have one more question on like what other problems you may be looking at, what other projects that you probably have in the pipeline, or probably general in TT Lab.
Well, for me in particular, I enjoy applying machine learning models to agriculture. So I've been in contact through this project with the University of the West Indies and the FST department with respect to life sciences. And they've been talking to us about the data that they've collected. And I'm interested in applying it to things like soil creep and flooding and satellite data that we would have through Sentinel satellites. And because I am really interested in also the computer vision aspect of machine learning, I'm going into that genre of study because I did environmental initially. So, it's just an ongoing passion at this point.
That really sounds exciting. So just wondering if do you have any advice for any women who may be watching this want to enter that field of machine learning? Do you have any tips or guidance for them?
Well, I mentor a couple of students right now in UE, and I think the thing that I tend to tell them the most is don't ever get discouraged, and remember that you're competing with your entire class, and don't ever be intimidated by that competition. You deserve to be there, and you need to show everyone else that you deserve to be there. So be ambitious, be competitive, don't try to silence yourself to try to make yourself more likable.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for this talk, Lizzie. I really enjoyed it. Any final thoughts before we close off?
I'm really interested in this organization. I didn't know about it before, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to get my project out there. And if anybody wants to contact us, you can contact us through TT Labs or the Cropper Foundation. They have a Facebook page.
Awesome.
That's it.
Awesome. That's great. Thanks again. And that's it for this session, everyone. And I'll see you all in the next one. And that's about brings us to the end for the first day of DevFest week. And we hope you will join us for the next couple of days as we get into the event on the weekend where we have more live talks. And until next time, I will see you tomorrow.